Welcome to the Intelligence Amplifiers, podcast that celebrates the people who make the intelligence a collective superpower. In every episode, we uncover the stories of learning and development leaders who amplify knowledge, break down silos, and empower teams to thrive. These are the enablers of insight, the ones turning expertise into action and shaping the future of work by ensuring that the right knowledge reaches the right people at the right time. So, if you're ready to explore how the intelligence is amplified and shared across organizations, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Intelligence Amplifiers. Today, we have Melissa Daimler joining us. Hello, Melissa.
Hi, Marco.
Great to see you.
It's good to see you as well.
We go way back. So Melissa and I worked together at Twitter back in the day, a few regime changes ago.
Yeah.
So
Glory
fun times.
days, we like to call it.
Exactly. I call it a peacetime Twitter.
Yes.
So the good old days.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to. You've had such a rich career and so much experience with some of the most amazing organizations. I wanted to start with the early days, and I believe it was at Adobe, right?
Mhm. Yep.
How did that come about?
Well, even before Adobe, I was part of the .com .bust era. I did get a taste of HR then. I got into a company coaching the executive team and then ended up running HR and not knowing what I didn't know. So that was an interesting experience. And through that company, really found that I enjoyed a lot of different aspects of HR and came to Adobe originally not in the learning capacity, but in both coaching and HR business partnering. So it was a great experience just to get to know the business, to be on the front lines, and to really understand how learning and organizational development is most needed at the front lines. So I was there for almost 11 years, which is unheard of now, but I feel like I learned a lot of what I got to apply later in my career there. And I would say Donna Morris was a huge mentor for me. She now is running HR at Walmart. And one of the biggest lessons earlier on was to be a business leader first. No matter what your function is, really understand what the business does and how you can best support and partner with that. So that was Adobe, and that was where you and I have talked about this a lot. I really started thinking more about learning and culture as part of a bigger system. So how do we think about this in a way that we can connect them to each other so that learning is stickier and we're more consistent in the kind of skills that we expect and want to develop in our employees.
Got it. And I just want to reiterate that because I think it's very important. Sometimes, there's this like learning for the sake of learning, but then there's learning that's strategic to the organization. I think that's what you mentioned, being a business leader and actually understanding what is it the business needs are and how can we use learning as a tool to basically help solve that.
Yes. I think the biggest shift at Adobe at the time, we also were there was a training organization. And to your point, it was just pushing out trainings, some of which people liked, some of them they didn't like. We have to all take the mandated trainings. But I really wanted to shift it to be more of a service function and really have people pull on our team to get what they need. And so it was a learning and what we called a learning and organizational development partner. So how do we partner with you in making sure that you have the right talent strategy, you're looking at your organizational design and structure, and we're reinforcing those skills that we want to reinforce both company-wide as well as what you need in that particular function. Because, and again, this is something that you and I have talked about in the past, is there's formal training, the formal learning that you all come together on, but we know that most of that good learning happens on the job in context with what you're doing. So we built up that function, and we're really seen as business partners working with key leaders to help them develop their employees to not only do their jobs, but become better leaders.
Yeah, yeah, and I had a firsthand experience of what you've created at Twitter. So I believe after Adobe, you went to Twitter, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So after Adobe, Twitter called, and at that time it was a rocket ship. There was just such a huge opportunity ahead, and they had done some training, but they really wanted to really figure out how do we create learning, tied to a bigger system. I mean, Dick Costello, the CEO, as you know, was big on learning. He taught management development there, which was so cool. And there really wasn't a function that had been built yet. So the opportunity to build something from scratch, both from a learning and organizational development standpoint in a company that was, growing so fast was a huge opportunity. So we got to do a lot of experimentation. We rolled out the first management development, Twitter Core 5. We launched the first engagement survey. We launched the first talent planning process. So we really created kind of a system, to help people learn the skills that we thought were needed in a growing company like that.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember I knew a lot about training engineers, but I knew nothing about leadership development and kind of doing all that organizational development, if you will. And I remember I was blown away by the fact that the CEO was teaching management courses, and I asked Dick about that, and he basically said something like, "This is the highest impact thing that he can possibly do is teach his own people." So I really enjoyed that about Dick and his commitment to management training. And then obviously I was blown away by your uh, Twitter Core 5, TC5.
Mhm.
I think we were like one of the early
You
cohorts.
guys helped us iterate.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was a
yeah,
lot of fun.
yeah, yeah.
There was a lot of role play. It was very very different than what I was used to. Obviously training engineers how to
Mhm.
code, managing and role playing and
Yeah,
doing that. It was very a lot of fun. I loved the longer arc. I think it was like multiple months, I believe,
yeah,
that we
yeah,
did it over. And yeah, what was the any data or any impact on that? Like, what was your
yeah.
observation as
I
you
mean,
ran it and rolled it out?
yeah, I mean, one of the things that, was a huge transition from Adobe to Twitter was just how fast we had to create that thing. Like, Adobe was, by the time I left, I think we were almost up 12,000 employees, surpassed, I think, 1 billion in revenue. So it was just, you were dealing with a much bigger context. And it was okay to take a little longer to roll things out. I remember Dick, I think it was my I had just completed my first month. He's like, where is that strategy? When are we rolling out management development? And so one of the things that, and I think this is, I talked to you about this, we had to roll things out and kind of iterate along the way just based on feedback. So it wasn't perfect the first time out. And some of the feedback was initially it was like 5 months. So we compressed it to, I think it ended up being 2 months at the end, because people liked the space, but they wanted to actually get done sooner. We had a lot more leaders as teachers. So we had people come in and talk about their expertise and how they've used each of those skills. So that was really good. And then just a lot of peer learning. I mean, just no matter what you're learning, the opportunity, and that still holds, that's been throughout my entire career, maybe even more so today, the opportunity just to, as you said, role play, practice in a safe space. And if nothing else, get validated that, oh, you're going through that situation too. Oh, you had a tough challenge with employees on this, setting direction and changing priorities. That's just validating that, I'm not doing anything wrong, but I just need to practice and continue to iterate in how I'm working with employees based on these skills. So in terms of metrics, we launched one of the first engagement surveys there. I remember Dick was blown away at just how much, quantitative data you could get from feedback like that. And we had a section for managers, so employees got to evaluate their manager. And we took that data not as punitive. We didn't, go after managers who had lower scores. We saw it as an opportunity to say, okay, you scored lower in these areas. We have Twitter Core 5 and other opportunities for you to get better at that and hopefully increase your score 6 months later when we roll this out. And we did see people who did participate in a lot of our learning experiences and who had one-on-one coaching, whatever kind of learning they did, there was a direct correlation in the increase of those scores.
Yeah.
So we tracked that pretty closely.
That's pretty cool when you can like close the loop and actually see that, here's a needle and we actually move the needle. So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. And I like how you said, so Twitter at that time was indeed a rocket ship. I think we're doubling. There was a pre-IPO and like we just kind of went and doubled workforce within, I don't know, a year or something like that. It was very, very rapid. So a lot of new people were coming on board. And I remember one of the mantras maybe was perfection is the enemy of good enough, right? So we just kind of like, we had to like just ship stuff and then fix it as the wheels came off. So that was a different approach than sort of like having the luxury of like polishing something forever.
Yeah. Having the perfect deck. I mean, I think I went in with Dick. I went into that meeting with like a half a piece of paper with like scribbles. He's like, "That's great. Let's just go with that." And it was uncomfortable, but we did push a lot of employees to kind of go to their edge on that. And we shipped a lot because of that.
Yeah. And so Twitter Core 5, the management development, that was near dear to me. I had such a wonderful experience. And then I remember your team, we partnered on engineering development training. And engineering management training, right?
Yep.
And so it was focused more on engineering managers because we were also doubling our engineering workforce. And you mentioned something which was interesting about peer learning and bringing leaders in. And so I see organizations where like L&D goes and builds some course in the, kind of like in vacuum. But that's not what we did at Twitter, right? We basically brought VPs of engineering who were teaching classes. So we were kind of creating, holding the space for them, or your team was. And so I thought that was wonderful.
You guys, it was a great partnership. I think sometimes L&D gets a bad rap, rightfully so, that it's this, kind of off in its own little world, trying to create these training programs and developing these certain skills. But, I do think the reason for wanting consistency across organizations is because it's just easier for employees and you just take out the complexity. And so when you're talking about, when you're at the table talking about, should Bob be promoted or not, or what do we give compensation to, to Becky? What's the compensation? If we're all coming from the same set of criteria, and there's associated skills that we're looking at with each of those people, it is so much easier to evaluate and reward and, develop people consistently. And so, I mean, even at Adobe, like I remember I had a lot of challenging conversations specifically with the engineering teams on, we just want our own set of values. We want our own set of skills. Why do we have to follow, the corporate way? And it's really a balance between, giving enough freedom for teams to kind of, do your own thing, have your own kind of mission statements, and being consistent enough so that we're all one team. We're all the same employee of the, of this company. And so if you move to a different function, ideally we have the same criteria and the same set of skills that we're building together. And so I do think it's a balance, and I think we've evolved over time. I've seen a lot of L&D teams and even, engineering teams and other functions understand the reason why we're trying to kind of have one overall approach and culture and context. But it is challenging in how you communicate that, because again, you want people to feel that freedom to kind of learn whatever the heck they want to learn.
Yeah.
Um, and you want them to, to your point, like if I'm an engineer, ideally I am both taking Twitter Core 5 as they did, and they did a lot of training with you and Sasha. So I think the engineering management training was a nice blend of both of that. That was a great example of, hey, let's take some of those skills that we know every leader needs here at Twitter in the context of how we're working as engineers,
Yeah.
right? That's basically what you guys were doing.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of developing leaders, I just wanted to also reflect on what you've done for your own team, right? So you being a leader for the L&D or LNOD team, and I know all of us left Twitter, but your core team is now all over Silicon Valley, and
Oh yeah.
they're the L&D leaders, and
Oh
they're
yeah.
doing amazing work, and I'm like, I would imagine you're so proud of
Mhm.
of the team that you developed, and it
Yeah.
started at Twitter. So yeah,
I think, going back to metrics, I think that's a metric I leverage as a leader and that I am proud of, because Nikki is doing
hmm
great stuff. She was at LinkedIn for a while.
and
The other
GitHub
Nikki,
and
it's yeah,
GitHub and Rivian and
yeah,
it's,
yeah.
yeah,
And then the other Nikki is at OpenAI, Emma's at Square, Caroline
Nathan is at Square.
I think is
Yeah,
a Dropbox. She's head of learning now. So yeah,
yeah,
I love it when I see people on my team who are now leading the way. So
yeah.
I think and they're, hopefully leveraging a lot of, what they learned along the way, just like I did with my mentors.
Yeah, yeah. No, kudos to you. That you definitely you caused ripples through the industry. So
Yeah.
it's really
Thanks.
nice. Yeah, and then of course Twitter went through a regime change or two, and most of
Or
us
3 or
or
4.
three, yeah, depends on
Yeah.
how you count. And most of us left, and I believe you went to WeWork afterwards, right? And we also briefly crossed paths. We did some consulting work or platform work for the engineering there, but you led L&D
Mhm.
at WeWork. How was that? How was that different?
Yeah. How was that? That is such a big question, Marco. I led both talent acquisition and development there. So it was an opportunity at the time. WeWork was also a rocket ship. It was also, I think it's good for us to get out of our little bubbles sometimes. And, I wanted to get out of the bubble of Silicon Valley and get into a different space. I think, while WeWork said it was a technology company, ultimately it was a real estate company if you look at its core business.
Hmm.
Uh, so the opportunity to lead both talent acquisition and development, and to, again, be part of a very fast growing company in New York City was huge. So I was there just a year. I mean, everybody knows what happened. You can watch the movie, you can read the books. I mention it quite a bit in my book, Reculturing, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the importance of really being clear on what your business is and what your strategy is, and the need to tie your culture to that. And that just wasn't there. I mean, we got into wave pools and all these other different business segments, and culture was more, uh, kind of happy hours and playing games and summer camps there, versus an opportunity to really leverage culture as, values based behaviors that you can reinforce and help develop over time. So yeah, it was a very long but quick year at WeWork. And, I'm really glad for the opportunity because I really had a chance then to pause and think about some of my experiences about learning and culture, and even more grateful for companies like Twitter and Adobe who I think got it right. So that's why I ended up writing my book and wanting to get something out there that was much more practical from a practitioner standpoint about culture and learning than just kind of theoretical uh, um, frameworks from a lot of people who had never really worked inside companies.
Yeah.
So I am really looking back, I can be grateful for that time.
Yeah, and so yeah, I remember after WeWork, you wrote the Reculture book,
Mhm.
and so culture is always something that's near and dear to me. And they say you have culture one way or another. It could be by chance or by choice, and I think you've had experience to be at some organizations that are very much intentional about culture. It was by choice, it was by design, right? Like Twitter was like that, Adobe as well. And then you've probably also observed how what's not culture, right? Like bringing dogs to work or like free booze and so on. That's probably not uh, culture. So how do you think about culture and like what makes an awesome culture in an organization?
I think culture is something we do. I always talk about it as something we do, not just something we have. And
Hmm.
so I defined it as three things. So it's really, it goes beyond values. I think when people think, "Oh, okay, well it's not happy hours, then it must be our values." Well, no, because a value of innovation can mean something very different at one company than it might mean at another company. At one company I was working with, they wanted to speed up ideas and go faster, like we were talking about. Like, how do you continue to iterate? One company I worked with also had innovation, but they said, "We're going way too fast. We're spending way too much money, and these ideas don't turn into anything. So we actually want to pause in these innovation discussions and really ask ourselves why. Like, why are we even going after this? How is this tied to the overall business strategy?" So that became a behavior in their organization where they asked each other why, and it wasn't, nobody felt defensive because they knew that that was something they agreed to. So I think you have to really go deeper than just create a list of values. You have to really understand, um, what are those behaviors that you want people to do with those values. What would it look like if, Marco was being innovative at our company? What does great look like? What would he be doing? What would he not be doing? And then you can create, again, that consistent criteria that you can use in everything. So hiring, onboarding, developing, rewarding, feedback, all of that gets easier when you have set up front what those behaviors should be, those expectations. So I talk about it as behaviors, processes, and practices. So the behaviors have to be tied to the core processes that you're already doing. You're already hiring. You're already onboarding. You're already doing performance coaching and management. You have to reward people. And then the practices to me are kind of those day-to-day practices that you do with your team. So they don't have to directly be tied exactly to the values, but how are you communicating with each other? How are you making decisions? How are you in meetings? Ideally, you're kind of uh, consistent behaviorally in those practices. So, like in that company who had innovation as a value, um, often in meetings, they would be asking each other why and kind of figuring out ways to slow down some of these ideas so that any idea that came out was something that they felt 100% that this would be successful. So, behaviors, processes, and practices, that's how I define
Behavior,
culture.
process, practice. Got it. Got it. Cool. And we'll get back to that. I'm super curious obviously about culture. and I want to ask you about in the context of AI in a bit. But after writing and WeWork experience, you went to Udemy, I believe. And what I found interesting about that is that you kind of had a dual role, right? Like you were
Yeah.
reporting both to HR, but also sales,
Yeah.
and tying it back to being a business leader. What did that mean for you?
Yeah, I feel like I got a mini MBA at Udemy because
Yeah.
being on the business side was so much fun. And I am not a good seller. I was pretty clear that I'm not going to be selling anything, and they were clear as well. But I got to be on customer calls as a thought partner, and the customers were me. I mean, we were trying to sell into heads of talent, heads of learning, CLOs. And so, what is the value proposition that we're selling, and how do we make sure that we're, um, addressing the needs that they have within our product and even with our services on top of that? So I got to dig deep on, our revenue numbers, our churn numbers, just endless numbers that I wasn't as familiar with before in any company. And it was a really good opportunity to really dig in on the business side and really to understand even, a lot of the challenges. Ed tech, as you well know, has had a lot of challenges. So how do we, in those conversations, how do we think differently? What do we need to do differently with our product? How do we make sure that whatever kinds of solutions and services we're offering are scalable, that we're not doing too many kind of customized or one-off kinds of services. So yeah, I really enjoyed, I mean, I'm still really good friends with the former head of revenue there and that whole team, because we got, you're in the trenches together in the ups and downs of the business. So it was a
Yeah.
huge opportunity. And I also had a bias that whatever we said to our customers, we had to prove that first internally. That was something that was really important to me. And so anything that we did, like when we started talking about AI and all of our courses, we created and built a, kind of a one pager of to use with teams. So you can take a course online, but we also want you to know that you have a resource here to then talk about what you just learned as a team. Like, what were some of the prompts that were useful to you? What are some prompts that we might be able to use as a team in the future? What surprised you? So, anything again that we did internally that we thought really worked and we saw made a difference with our own employees, we would then share that out as best practice to our customers.
Yeah, and I find that super interesting, that particular role at Udemy, because not only you were doing learning and development internally, but you represented the L&D persona,
Hmm.
right? Like you were sort of like the exemplar of what the needs and the desires and so on are of an L&D persona, because that was Udemy's business. So I
Yep.
thought that was super interesting. And speaking of that, uh, I think I'm noticing like learning and development is shifting. Yeah, like you alluded, how tech is having some challenges and so on. What are you seeing? Like, what seat at the table do we now have as learning and development professionals in tech specifically, um, and how's that changing?
I think we have a lot more tools that are available to us than ever before to do what we've been wanting to do all along, which is how do we, there's this great idea of just in time learning, on the job learning, but it's been hard. Like, how do you do that? Um, so I think there's opportunities for um integrating that more. I know Coursera has a partnership now with OpenAI where, you're typing something in and it picks up the fact that you're trying to learn something and it says, "Hey, I know a course that you can do on this that's, 3 minutes. Do you want to just do something quickly on that?" And that is brilliant because we know that, again, the best learning happens kind of in the moment when I need it. So I think we're going to see a lot more uh, point solutions that will help that just-in-time learning piece. And one of them is AI. You and I talked a little bit about AI coaching. There are so many. I looked at a report yesterday, and there's probably over 25 AI coaching companies now, specifically focused on, how do I help individuals day to day kind of get coaching on what it is they're working on. And if there's a particular set of skills, how do I give them feedback for them to then leverage that to become better? Um, and I think there's an opportunity here where I almost think about it in the same way as when we think about the flipped classroom. So if there's any kind of reading or any formal kind of learning to do it before we come together so that when we come together, we can have a conversation, we can practice, we can use that time in a much more useful way. I see the same thing for AI coaching. So if I have an AI coach and I'm getting feedback from my meeting recorder, whatever that is, I also have an opportunity this is controversial for data reasons, but it looks at my Slack, it looks at my email, and it gives me feedback based on questions I'm asking. I bring all that data to my manager and I say, hey, looks like I need to improve some skills around asking questions in my meetings. Or it looks like, I'm not guiding these conversations as clearly as I thought I was. Do you see the same, manager? And then that conversation can be much richer and more meaningful because I, as an employee, am bringing so much more data and context to that development conversation than we could have before. And so this whole kind of development conversation is, it just becomes much more meaningful. It's not as hard. I mean, you and I know, these are not easy conversations all the time, especially when you're giving feedback or trying to help an employee get a little bit better in some areas. If they can have more self-reflection based on some of these tools, then that's just a huge opportunity for everybody.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know. What do
yeah.
you think?
Yeah, I remember when I was asking about AI, and you said something like 2025 was a year of experimentation, and many
Yeah.
are doing it wrong. And 26 is going to be like a big reset, and people are going to start finally figuring out how to use this thing. So it sounds like coaching, like doing coaching, like this, almost like you mentioned, flipped classroom, doing things ahead of time with AI,
Yeah.
but then human in the loop, bringing
Yeah.
that to your manager so you
Yeah.
can figure
Yeah.
out your development plan.
Yeah, I think, and when we were talking about 2025, my experience, and even at Udemy, we did this a little bit in the beginning. Like, I think everybody's just like, okay, do AI, go experiment with AI, go, go, go do more prompting, and it just, what does that even mean? Like, what problems are we trying to solve? To your point, what metrics are we leveraging here? Are we trying to be more productive? Are we trying to use less energy? Are we trying to be more efficient? I think we're realizing that we need to be much more strategic and prescriptive and intentional about what it is we're doing with AI and how do we leverage the tools more effectively. I was talking with a company the other day, and they're panicked now because everything is about agentic AI. And they have an enterprise license with one of, I can't remember if it was Gemini or Anthropic or one of them. And I asked a lot of questions around, how are you using that? How are your employees kind of leveraging that? Do they even know that that's available? Are you seeing usage numbers? No clue. No clue. And so before before we jump to agentic AI, let's make sure that we're first using the tools we have and that we understand why we're using them, how to use them, and how it's helping, either solve problems or helping us kind of figure out how to do work much more effectively than we are today.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a new tool, and then like all tools, how do we adopt it, and like what's the feedback loop? Back to metrics, right? Like what needle
Yeah.
are we moving, and by how much, and in what direction, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what else are you excited about? Like what's on the horizon for you, or what are you, what are you focused on these days?
I mean, going back to culture, I mean, I do think that a lot of, I mean, this has been talked about so much, but I think we're realizing yet again that this is a major shift in how we work. And yes, it's technology, but it's a cultural and organizational issue. Like we have to kind of rethink, how we want to structure ourselves. Where are we able to automate or augment? Where does it even make sense? There are leaders I'm working with right now who say, you know what, I know I can automate that set of tasks, but right now it doesn't make sense on that team. There's too many other initiatives, and I just think it would impact engagement in some of the other things they're doing. So we're making a call not to do that now. So um, I think the good leaders and the good companies are really um, looking at this as a system change and as a cultural shift, and taking a step back to really think differently about just how work gets done. So I get excited about the opportunity to work with leaders and companies in just establishing what's what's current, like what is current state, what are your current workflows, and getting much more clear about what we're working on and how we're working than we ever have before, really. um and
Hmm.
then what's the opportunity to improve that. And then where I get most excited is there's a lot of chatter around, human skills are still there, and I don't what does that mean? So let's get much more clear on um, what it is that we're expecting, human in the loop to do. Like, what does that mean? Things like critical thinking. And if so, what are the micro skills with that? Does that mean making better judgment calls? Does that mean coaching, but in a much more, as we talked about before, meaningful way? Like, how do I get managers to ask more questions, to really listen to their employees in that different context of AI coaching? So I get excited about, the opportunity we have to kind of rethink work altogether, and then kind of rethink that whole employee employer contract. And, what does it look like to do work differently and to develop differently based on the skills we have available?
I love that. Rethink work, and specifically rethink that contract, right? There's the sort of the old narrative, like you join a company and you're there for like, you know, forever, right?
Mhm.
Or, but there's also an opportunity to kind of redesign that and be more of a coaching, growth, learning experience. And I love that. I love that
Yeah.
way of thinking. Yeah. So stepping back and looking at the arc of your career, right? Like you started with Adobe, learned the ropes there, then went to the rocket ship Twitter and like built leadership development there, and like did all this like amazing work in a company that was growing rapidly, and then redid that at WeWork and then Udemy, and wrote a book along the way on reculture. So you've accomplished so much in the space of like learning and development. Um, Looking back, what would be a piece of advice you would give to your younger self?
It is such a big question. I think learning and being a good leader starts with yourself, and making sure that you take the time for self reflection, especially in Silicon Valley, like we're running so fast. Understanding what your values are, understanding, uh, you know, what kind of practices are going to help you be a good leader. I used to joke, Nikki used to make fun of me at Twitter when, she always knew when I didn't meditate or go to the gym in the morning because I was a scattered mess. So just know what works about you as a leader and some of those foundational practices and values that are really important to you, that you want to maintain throughout your career. That's what I would say is just there's going to be a lot of ups and downs, but if you can get clear on who you are and what's important and keep doing those consistently, then, you'll be able to be resilient through those challenges.
Got it. So leading from within,
Mm-hmm.
and
Great. Yeah, that's a good
that,
way to
that's
say
what I
it.
heard.
Yeah.
Well, Melissa, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's so inspiring. Great to see you, and always great
Yeah,
to
thanks for
reminisce
having me,
on.
Marco. It's fun
Yeah,
to reminisce.
yeah, exactly. Thank you again. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of the Intelligence Amplifiers. If you like what you've heard, be sure to subscribe or follow so you don't miss out on the future episodes. And if you're interested in being a guest or have a question, check out the episode description for how to reach us. Also, don't forget to check out Plus Plus, the platform that makes collective intelligence at scale possible. Find out more at plusplus.co. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep amplifying.